raw, uncut, and unapologetic. Welcome to Men Talking Mindfulness with your hosts John McCaskill and Will Schneider. Here we focus on helping men and those with men in their lives solve some of life's complex challenges through understanding the practices of mindfulness and how they can help. Each episode is in an environment free of judgment and criticism, with a focus on authenticity and inner peace. Let's dig in.
Build in the habit to constantly check your thoughts to ensure you are following your performance statement or your directed self-talk script. When you observe negative thoughts, you instantly reframe and replace them with the positive thoughts that you have at the ready. There is power in calling out the negative thoughts and then reframing them. That is from today's guest, retired Navy SEAL Master Chief Stephen Drum, and he has written the book Life on the X. That's an excerpt from that book. Welcome to Men Talking Mindfulness. I'm John McCaskill, and each week my co-host Will Schneider there in New York City, and I work to break down and demystify an aspect of mindfulness and make it meaningful to you. Before we get too far into the show, I'm going to turn it over to Will, and we're going to go through some announcements. Over to you, brother.
Hey, it's great to be back in the studio. Last Friday, we recorded in the car, if you remember, which was great, right? And being impeccable with your word. So yeah, hey, it's good to be back. I'm excited to talk to Stephen today. And just announcement, hey, help us grow the show, right? And that could be leaving us a review would be amazing. Or take a screenshot right now if you're listening on podcast and post that to your social media, tag Men Talking Mindfulness, tag Will Not Fear, and say how much you're enjoying Men Talking Mindfulness, and ask people to come and join the show and see why you're enjoying it so much. Also, on our service on Spotify and other platforms, we have subscription-based episodes. So if you like to do some of our meditations, if you like to take a little deeper dive into some of the mindful technical aspects of mindfulness, we have a $4.99 monthly subscription. That you can just access, and helps us grow the show, keeps us live, keeps us going, keeps us inspired when we see, those small donations coming in every month. So thank you and for doing that, and please spread the word of Men Talking Mindfulness. Yeah.
That's at the website, and we'll put this in the show notes. But for now, if you're watching, it's www.anchor.fm/Men Talking Mindfulness /subscribe. That's how you get there. www.anchor.fm/Men Talking Mindfulness /subscribe. And we'd love to have you as a subscriber, and it would help us keep the show going. So very much appreciate you. That said, I'm going to bring Stephen up on the stage here, if you will. Welcome, Stephen Drummy, as I know you, man. How are you?
Hey, John. Hey, Will. Thanks so much for having me on. I'm really excited for this.
As are we.
Likewise, brother.
Yeah, so our guest today is a former teammate of mine, actually. We're at SEAL Team, I almost said Stephen team. It pretty much was the Stephen team.
That's right, yeah.
Oh, my God, the egos are flowing already.
Oh, that's right.
Oh,
right.
Shit.
Just hardly.
So, yeah, we're at SEAL Team 10 together. So retired Navy SEAL Master Chief Stephen Drum, or as I know him, Drummy. During his 27 years of service, he developed and led high-performance teams in combat at every level, and is the most challenging and extreme, and in the most challenging and extreme environment.
I remember when I was, and I touched on the mindfulness piece. I supported that. I was in a supporting role when it came to the mindfulness instruction in the warrior toughness role in the Navy.
Yep.
And so but I would often joke. I'm like, hey, I can't believe I'm a Navy SEAL, been doing this for 20 some years, and here I am talking about meditation. I thought that was just for stinky yoga pants wearing hippies, but here I am.
Thanks, guys. That once again.
We just got the double word from Will.
I'm just kidding, guys.
But the truth is that I think one of the things that makes us so good in the SEAL teams is that we don't care about who this technique comes from, where it comes from. If we can steal it, if we can adapt it to refine and enhance our own tactics and procedures, we're absolutely going to do that. And when it comes to me looking at mindfulness, and I realize that not only does the research prove that it's effective, it was anecdotally, it was effective in my own life. You know, because so much of what we do, right, is our mental capacity to be able to perform as special operations forces on the battlefield. And unfortunately, so much of that, well, it's intuitively learned. Nobody ever taught me mental skills when I was a young SEAL operator. If I was successful, it's because I knew, hey, if I'm going to go onto this battlefield, if I'm going to go through this really stressful close quarter combat training, I'm going to have to take a moment. I'm going to have to mentally rehearse what I might do and what my answer is going to be to that. And so I think when it comes to what's going on in your head, I like to say that there's a whole litany of mental skills that I teach. And I like to say that mindfulness training is kind of that glue. It's kind of that support, because without that, I can't engage with those mental skills as effectively as I could with that. Meaning, like, when it comes to, you mentioned it in the beginning, we talked about check your thoughts. Yep. Well, that was one of the things I learned from one of my psychologist friends would say, hey, I want you to be better when she'd work with kids and things like that. I want you to be better at listening to your inner world. Well, you can't do that if you're not mindfulness. If you can't stop and say, my hands are sweating, my jaw is clenched because somebody said something that upsets me. Okay, if I was a cartoon character, what would the thoughts be over my head right now?
Was there a moment, Stephen, when after you started being more mindful and meditating, that you saw it translate into your professional life, whether on the battlefield or other aspects of your life? Was there this, oh my God, this isn't just woo-woo, tree-hugging, woofy bullshit, I think was one person said in our retreat, John, right? But this stuff actually works. So was there that defining moment where it's like, look, like, this is part of my basic skills package because of how important it is?
My first exposure to mindfulness / meditation was up in, and I don't know if you attended this place, NICO, John. It's National Intrepid Center of Excellence, and it's run by the Grant. It's near the Bethesda Joint Bethesda Walter Reed Hospital up there in Maryland. And anything from the neck up, whether it's PTS, whether it's traumatic brain injury, gets you to the door. But from there, it's head to toe. And they do any and all modalities when it comes to kind of, managing emotions and managing stressors. And that's where I first discovered mindfulness, but it wasn't kind of packaged in a way that I could kind of pick it up yet and understand it. And it really wasn't until I started teaching the Warrior Toughness. And again, I'm so grateful for what I learned from my psychologist and my chaplain colleagues. And it was then when I've always had a temper. I've always had a quick fuse. But the first thing I really, really noticed when I started practicing mindfulness training more was it's almost like I had a break, right? I had a break to give myself that pause and be like, hey, I started feeling the emotions, right? Because emotions, they're very valid. They have a valid purpose. They give us information that is often very useful. But how do we process? What is our response to that emotion? And what I found was when I'm aware of my emotions, then I can stop and I can replace and reframe those. I can choose an action or a behavior to shape my feelings at that point through my thoughts.
Excellent. Thanks for making that distinction and supporting the work that we do. It does make a huge difference to be emotionally aware, and instead of being emotionally succumb, right, and then making bad choices because our emotions, and when we make choices that are typically emotional, they're not the best choices, or we regret them, or we're backpedaling or apologizing or something. But to have that reframe and one of the only ways that could really, I'm sure other ways to get there, but one of the most effective ways to get to that emotional intelligence and just understand yourself on the most basic fundamental emotional levels is through objectifying, is through taking time to meditate, is to taking time to understand how your breath can calm down your nervous system, and you can create that clarity. You can take that objective view, kind of zoom out, and then you have that opportunity to take different actions. The reframe you mentioned is huge, right? So instead of like your negativity bias and the associated feelings that are coming in and kind of activating that negativity bias, I'm like, oh, I'm shit because I did this, or now whatever it is, you can really take yourself out of that emotional state, right, and into just being effective, not just on the battlefield but also in life. Any comments on that, or John? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean,
that was very clear.
I just want to build on what Drummy was talking there, about the emotions and how important they are, how valid they are, right? But you also, in your book, you talk about how the practice of meditation was a game changer for you in the ability to maintain emotional control and focus. So there's acknowledging the emotions, but there's also, a desire to stay in front of your emotions, or at least stay in control of your emotions. Can you talk about how meditation has helped you to control your emotions, and then why emotional control is so important in your life?
Yeah, and so many, I'll go, but this is the first thing that popped into my mind. When we would teach, the recipients of the training that I gave directly were what we call RDCs, recruit division commanders. Now, these are like in the other armed services, these would be called drill instructors, right? You think of the Army, Marine Corps, the big Smokey the Bear hats. Well, in the Navy, we call them recruit division commanders. So those were the people that we taught. It was almost a train the trainer type of thing. We taught them and we qualified them to then go and lead some of these exercises and conduct kind of the training for the recruits themselves. And one of the things I always said was, when it comes to that emotions, it was like, you're screaming at this recruit, and it's like, well, is that right or wrong? And is it okay to yell at a recruit like that? Well, the correct response is, if that's because that's a tool you think is necessary. If you're using it very tactically to say, yes, this recruit has lost their focus, they need a little, a boot in the ass right now, I'm going to choose to yell at them. Now, if I yell at them all the time, if yelling is my go-to, what happens? People shut down. It no longer becomes an effective tool.
Right.
And so if you let it, aggression, a lot of times, you want aggression on the battlefield, right? But you want aggression, and you want to try to separate that from anger, because it's easy for those two roommates to become conjoined, right? In that house, right? The two roommates. You want to be able to separate that aggression, because if you're not mindful of it, that aggression will become anger, right? And so you got to be very specific with how you do that.
Yeah. If you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? Well, and you're not going to be effective.
Well, right? I'll go back to the initial thing, right? I'm sorry to cut you off, Will.
No worries. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Please.
I'll go back to the original thing we talked about when I mentioned, hey, a lot of the things that I learned intuitively. But the problem with that is you don't learn to apply them in that broader sense, right? Because then you have your professional bucket and your personal bucket, right? And for me, not to say that I didn't have plenty of work to be done and improvement and even managing my emotions in the professional sense. But to me, I was able to kind of flip that switch that says, all right, the bullets are flying. I can maintain my poise and my focus. But at the same time, when I go home now in a different context, I cannot carry that over because I didn't learn it as a specific skill set. And so when I started doing mindfulness training, when I started doing the meditating, now I can say it's the same thing. Because are you able to properly distill the emotional signal that you're getting and choose the right action and behavior or not? It doesn't matter if it's fear, if it's anger, if it's frustration, if it's anxiety. You have to be able to respond properly to the emotional impulse.
Good. Yeah. Thanks for that. And well, and this is kind of a question for both of you, maybe. And you both, were SEALs, saw combat. How? I mean, so and then now we're all kind of teaching in the in the civilian world. What was it like for you guys to, kind of get away from that life-threatening battlefield situation where, like, obviously you want to be as proficient as possible. You want to be highly trained. You want to be really great on those basics. So when shit goes down, like you're very effective and you're looking out for your brothers, and hopefully you're going to succeed in that mission. But then now you're in the civilian world without the enemy, without the bullets, without like this very, very heightened circumstance. What was that like transition like for you? Number one, to become more of a civilian, and then to be teaching civilians without that life-threatening, without those enemies out there. If I'm making sense, like, because there's a big transition, like there's a big difference between me being out there as a yoga teacher, as a mindfulness person, as a teacher, and trying to grow a business. And my threats are probably myself most of the time, right? Procrastinating, not being very clear on the basics that I need to continually, and fundamentals that I need to keep doubling and tripling down on, right? And also, imposter syndrome, getting over myself as far as like making that phone call, making that sales call and be like, oh shit, like, I don't know if this guy wants nothing to do with me, but I'm going to call him anyway. So how does it translate? What is it like to be civilian now? Right. And then what is it like to teach civilians without, in this capacity?
Do you want to take that, John?
Yeah, I'll take a piece of it. I mean,
Thank you, guys.
I think Drummy and I again are going to have different experiences because again, the officer role in the military is different. And I started kind of drawing back from the battlefield much sooner than Drummy did. So like my enemies became fucking PowerPoint and email pretty quick.
Office politics too, I imagine, or something, right?
There's a lot of office politics in the military. If you want to make this rank in the officer side, you have to meet these wickets, you have to go through these different trainings, you have to have done this X, Y, and Z. And after a point, I got pretty tired of it. But transitioning to the civilian world, my transition is not typical. I've transitioned into the mindfulness arena, first of all. So obviously that's atypical, but second is going straight into being an entrepreneur, where I work in this co-working space where
beautiful office, John.
I work by myself a lot, right? Being an entrepreneur, or as you guys used the term earlier, a solopreneur. I am in front of my computer again. So that the transition in some aspects it's very similar to what I was doing in the military. I'm still making phone calls, sending emails, putting together presentations, but I'm leaning heavily on what I learned in the military as a leader, as a manager. I mean, I don't like the fact that there was management, but there is management within the militaries. But taking those sides of things, learning the aspects of leadership that I think are the most important, and a lot of them are the same as what Drummy feels. The resilience, the grit, being prepared, and then having a heart of compassion. For me, those are the 4 big ones. But I think the transition, the hardest part, and we've talked about this on the show before, is being part of a tribe. Right now, I'm again all alone working, but before I was part of a team, part of a platoon, part of a troop, part of a team in the SEALs, and that was huge. And then finding a purpose, and I know Drummy can talk about that probably at length, is finding that purpose, because you have that purpose kind of given to you in the SEAL teams or in the military as a larger organization. You have the purpose, and you kind of identify that because it's been given to you. Now, when you get out of uniform, finding that new tribe, finding that new purpose, that's a tough aspect of it. I'll turn it over to you, Drum.
Yeah. And I would say exactly the same thing that you mentioned in terms of my biggest challenges are, and I think most people, and I think this, I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of suicide necessarily, but I think there is a huge, if you just set aside suicide and just talk about kind of depression that strikes a lot of our veterans, is really that loss of connectedness, right? You're going from that defined purpose in a team, in a tribe, and now you're doing it kind of all by yourself. Even if you're in another team, you may not feel connected to that team because the experiences are vastly different. I think for me, one of the things that was actually super helpful, and this is what I try to communicate to people that work for me when I was at the boot camp, right? Because, most of my Navy career, honestly, most of it was spent around Army folks when we deployed. It is joint environment, Army, Air Force, to a more limited extent, Marine Corps. Less so the Navy. So when you go up to the Navy's boot camp, it doesn't get any more Navy than that. It has to be. It's, as they say, the quarterdeck of the Navy. It's as Navy as it can be. Well, that's a whole different environment. And I told the guys, I said, look, you gotta look at this as an opportunity to kind of dip your toes into different cultures and different norms, because, you're going to experience this in a couple of years when you get out. So use this opportunity right now while you've got the training wheels on. And that's, I think, helpful. I had to learn a new culture. When I made Master Chief actually up at boot camp, I now was pulled into a higher level of leadership. And so I had to learn all of that stuff. And people initially came in, they're like, you're a terrible sailor. I'm like, I know. I don't know any of this. I'm like, I don't know any of this stuff, but I'm going to learn from you. So that, but to me, it's like, I struggle with those same things, John, but I think where I'm able to really take away from the military lesson is And as John said, whether it's building PowerPoints, right? Whether it's working on a program that I did before I left, it's military, equipment programs. It's like, here's your desired end state. Here's what the goal is. And no matter what it is, whether it's the enemy, whether it's a project, how we build back. How do we align resources, knowledge, skills, attributes to set the table for our success, no matter what the objective is?
Excellent.
Yeah, and you talk about purpose. We've talked about purpose there. And in your book, in your summary, you have written, having a strong sense of purpose is one of the foundational ingredients that keeps us on course and enables us to make the right decisions and behave in the right way, regardless of circumstances, right? So we're looking at our purpose, our ideals, and our values, and some of what you just mentioned there. What are your suggestions for someone who is completely lacking purpose? How to find that purpose, how to refine that purpose if it's not perfectly refined for them?
Yeah, I think the first place to start, it doesn't have to be the first place, but I think an easy way to start is defining the values. The values not only that you have, but the values that you think are important, right? And one of the easiest ways to look at that I learned is look at the people that you admire in your life. Okay, hopefully they're positive people, right? If you look outside of your home, you look at the celebrities, I don't know, leaders in any context, and you say, what about this do I respect, do I admire? And then if you can, hopefully in your own personal life, you look to those, your mentors, people that you're like, I want to be like that person. I like what they're doing. Because when you identify that, most often what you're really identifying with are the values and the beliefs and the morals that you think that person ascribes to. And so from that, you can say, all right, well, why? Why do I respect that person? Well, they always come across, they're honest, they're effective, they're trustworthy, whatever that is. And then you start to flesh out, these are the values that are important to me, right? And from there, you're like, all right, I've got this list of values. All right, so if I take these values, how do I live these values? Well, you live values by creating principles. Right. So if you want to be trustworthy, then you have to say, I always show up on work. I show up to work on time. I show up prepared. I do what I say I'm going to do. If I don't, I have a good reason and I communicate that early. Right. It's those type of things. You live those values through principles. And then you're able to say, all right, if I'm going to take these principles and I'm going to write them out into a statement that describes kind of who I am, what I'm all about, what I aspire to be, where I want to go in life, and how I'm going to get there, then I create what I call a personal mission statement that is those things. And then you're like, all right, well, that's what I stand for. And that becomes kind of your purpose. Right. And you make it, and you can have one for your professional life. You can also have one for your personal life when it comes to being a spouse, a parent, from being a teammate, but at a certain point, there needs to be something overarching that says, these are the things more broadly that are important to me, right? So when you're able to make hard decisions when it comes to career versus family, which, is just often the things that we all face, right?
Yeah. And these values, and exercising them in principles, like when really, I like the way you talk about, like, just look at someone that you admire and what are those, what are the values that they continually bring through their work, everything that they do, the words that they say, really the actions that they take. And that like when you work from that place of value, it's going to naturally eventually take us into the purpose, because we're working from, instead of what I think I should be doing, based on whatever kind of upbringing we had or influence that we have in our lives. When we work from that place of value, we're working from our heart, and we start working from that heart space, right? That's when we're tapping so much deeper into our humanity itself, instead of it just being our doing the right thing or because I think it's the right thing, versus like, I feel this way, I'm going to move it, I'm going to act in this way, and I'm going to move forward in this way. Because we're, John, we've seen a lot ever since Dan St. Pierre came on and talked about the United Anatomy of Being. And he really helped me understand how important heartfulness is and what heartfulness does. And it's that unifying energy that's within our heart, whereas the mind dissects, divides, and kind of change, it looks at the world in a different way. And it's both parts are essential, right? The mind in the sense of like, I need to know the difference between, a rock and a hammer, or hammer and nail, just to come back to the reference earlier. But like the heart begins to unify things together. And once we if we unify with ourselves from those values, right, we're going to have a much better time unifying those values out in the world to other people. So I think, does that make sense? Does that make sense to what you're talking about there, Stephen, as far as like the values kind of come from that place of like our core of our being and the heart of who we are?
No, that's exactly right. It's that foundation, right? And then from
right.
that, we have to choose the appropriate action that supports that, or at least be very deliberate if we need to go off course. But that also has to come with the understanding that we can't, it's not realistic for us to think that we're going to be infallible people that just are not going to stray from that path sometimes. And I think it's when we have to respond to that as well. We have to respond to our own shortcomings, our disappointments, right? And that's where the hopefully the mission statement guides us to where it's so front and center for us, just like mindfulness itself, that we notice, that we catch ourselves doing something that's out of character, that really isn't who we want to be, who we want to represent ourselves to be, right? And the other part of that is if you're in question, you say, those people that I described, that I mentioned, my mentors, those people that I kind of maybe hold myself accountable to, right? And I say, okay, is the decision, is the choice that I'm making right now, would it survive the scrutiny by the people that I most admire? And if not, then maybe I need to rethink that, because I'm probably stepping off the path.
Yeah, it's a brilliant litmus test. It really is. Like, would my idol, or would my, would they approve? That's
what
really
would Will
great.
do?
I love that. Yeah,
right. Well, and it's funny. It's funny, but like in reading about Stoicism, I'm a big fan of Stoicism. The Greeks, the Romans. One of the things that they would advise, right, is having that panel of advisors, right, for that exact reason, is what I'm doing right now. And that can be imaginary. It doesn't have to be actual. I would say take it a step further and get people. You have that personal mission statement. We'll get some people to hold you accountable to that, right? But have that panel of advisors as if they're always watching you and judging what you're going to do, right?
Thank you for that. I'm
going to kind of throw a little bit of a loop, or maybe throw you for a little bit of a loop here, Drummy. So in one of our past episodes, we talked about the victim versus the victor mindset, or
victim versus hero.
Victor, thank you. Victim versus hero mindset with Jay Cosby. He wrote a book. He's a Marine veteran, and he brings up the 5-paragraph op order, the planning order, and how to use that, the SMEAC. And you just talked about the mission statement. I thought maybe you could talk about the SMEAC and how SMEAC can apply to not just the military planning, but us in our lives.
Right. I think sometimes it's so important for us to have, before we jump in with both feet and dig into that agenda, right, we have to have that balcony view. Not only do we have to have it from the outset, again, we need to be able to have that toggle switch. We need to be able to vary that focus. From, you described the difference between an officer and enlisted. Often it's, the officers, they need to be micro informed, but macro aware, right? If you're a ground force commander officer, overall in command of an operation, you have to be aware of it all. And my job as a senior enlisted leader is to run. Like, the officer is not saying, hey, you 2 guys go over there and do that. You 3 guys do this. That's not what they're doing. That's my job. And even more, and below me, it's the team leader's job to do that. It's the officer. It's my job to push all the information up to the officer, the ground force commander, to make those decisions. But everything has to start off. What we call in the military, we have what's called a commander's intent, meaning it's the commander's vision. We go into a valley in Afghanistan for a 3-day operation, right? It's very clear what needs to happen, what effects we need to have on the ground at the end of that 3-day mission. And SMEAC is the acronym. It's called the 5-paragraph patrol order. It's your situation, mission, it's your execution phase, admin, and logistics, and command and signal, right? That's what it stands for. And the great thing about that is it's your basic framework. You're like, all right, here's the situation. We've got this happening at this embassy in Africa. Okay, well, what are we going to do? Well, the mission is we've got to evacuate the embassy personnel. That's the mission, right? This is a lot more detailed than this,
sure,
right? Okay, execution. All right, well, execution at the broadest levels, we're going to get on some C-130s. We're going to fly down. We're going to transition over to helicopters, and then we're going to drop our boats, whatever that is. Execution, who's going where, who's doing what at the specific. Okay, and then the important part is your admin and your logistics, okay? That could be as simple as, well, how are we getting to the airfield? How are we making sure that we have whatever supplies we need downrange with those helicopters ready for us? And then lastly, command and signal the communication plan. Now, what's useful about this is whenever we have to execute a contingency, one story I tell is when we thought we were going to a house, the enemy was going to blow the building up around us. And so we're like, run away, everybody. Okay, what do we do now? So that's when you pull out that SMEAC real quick. It's your framework. It can be on the fly, right? Situation, here it is. We can't go in that building. We got to figure some way a resolution. Okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to go over there to that house. We're going to use a tactic to get them out of that house. We're going to question them and figure out what to do. That's the mission. All right, execution. Alpha team, Bravo team, you're going to stay here. You're going to hold on that building. Charlie, Delta, we're going to go over there and we're going to execute this tactic, right? So, and all the things that could go wrong with that, right? And I think that's important for business. It's like,
absolutely.
I'm getting ready to launch into this meeting with this client or customer. Okay, what's my overall objective?
Yeah.
Okay, I have my tactical objective, which is I want this person to buy my product. Okay, but then from there, it's like, okay, well, I've got other things that are important. At the end of the day, I got to make sure that I leave this client engagement with a relationship that's further advanced, at the very least intact, right? So we can take those things. We're getting ready to run an event. We're getting ready to then all right, what are the logistics? Catering, vehicles, transportation. Who do I need to make sure that I communicate to? So that was a very long-winded.
No, not at all. I mean, I just keep hearing the big difference between being tactical, being specific, taking the time to flesh out or what you just spoke of instead of winging it. And what's winging it to do? I mean, it's like, it's not going to, you're going to be nervous. I think all of that preparation is going to create confidence. You have something to ground yourself into. You have something to continually refer to, regardless of whatever the situation is, whether it's a meeting, whether it's a class, whether it's, a pitch in a sales thing, and just getting that granular and being that specific and rehearsing those things as well, is just going to just make you more effective, regardless of what you do, battlefield, office, even in you're going on family vacation. It's like, hey, okay, what's the purpose? To have fun, right? And then keep coming back to having fun and what that's going to, I mean, it's like, maybe you don't plan your vacations like that, or everybody doesn't. But like, just imagine if you did,
That's funny. I use an example like that in my book. I talk about planning a trip to Disney World, an example trip to Disney World. And we got all this, we've got our tickets, we've got this, and we go to the park, we're meeting here, right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that we have to be rigid. It just means we've got a roadmap to our success, and that's dialed in, and we know the plan, and we can take an off ramp whenever we want to, if that's what serves. We don't have to be right. It doesn't have to be that rigid.
That's right. We got to plan for the contingencies, the branches,
and that's part of the plan,
right?
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
That's part of the plan. It's like, all right, well, it didn't go well. All right, well, I for that at least talked about it. I'm not going to be flat-footed because life went off script for a second.
Yeah,
that's right. Well, awesome, man. I love everything you're doing. I love everything you're teaching here. Excited to have your book out next month for everyone to read. Very excited for you to have that book out. So what have we not covered that you want to make sure we cover before we go into that final closing practice, brother?
Good question. I would say just don't underestimate the value. Like you talked about winging it, right? There's knowing your stuff, and then there's actually walking through and really being tight on that, right? And then you ask, like, one of the reasons that I like being a professional speaker, because to me it's like a combat operation. And I use that. Like I talk about being on the X, the title of the book, which is like, hey, we fast rope out of a helicopter onto the rooftop of a building that we're assaulting. That's the doctrine term, like of landing on the spot, is the X. But again, if we're getting ambushed and we're in a kill zone, that's the X too. And we have to maneuver to get off of that X. But our ability to succeed there is only as good as how well we practice, we rehearsed to be in that moment. And when I go out on stage, it's the exact same thing. Right? Did I set the table for success? can I be counted on to deliver? And I think don't take anything for granted. Constantly building the habits for your success. Be ruthless and machine-like in the pursuit of the most fundamental aspects of your craft or your pursuit.
I'll have one more thing, and so doing this work, speaking, working with different companies and stuff, like what is like where have you seen, or what is like most as a coach and as a trainer in the civilian world with solopreneurs and companies, like what was like a great experience that you've had with them, or see them when they begin to shift, when they begin to become more mindfully tough? Have you seen that individual thrive or that company, change in some ways? I'm just curious about, some actual real world results from the stuff that you're teaching.
It's funny. I was at a speaking event once, and sometimes, you get good feedback and you're like, okay, yeah, things are going well. People like it. Obviously the ultimate confirmation of that is when they ask for you to come back and speak again. And I remember, I'm sitting there, and sometimes you're like, okay, I'm going out there, I'm doing this stuff, but you always sometimes in the back of your mind, I'm like, am I really making an impact? Right. And one time I had a gal, I'm back in the lobby of this hotel where the event is, right. I'm getting ready to sit there. I'm ready to get back on my plane. They were gonna get an Uber ride to the airport. And this gal sneaks up to me, looks around, and she says, look, I was pretty sure I was going to be out of this company as soon as possible. And she's like, after you talked, you made me realize that I need to do a much better job of focusing on the things that I control. And that's really probably a source of kind of my anxiety and my unhappiness, is that I am not taking better control of the things that I can affect. And I'm like, and I was obviously feeling really good about that, right? That was a huge ego bump. And then of course, cynical me is like, all right, well, is she going to be there in another 6-8 months? Right. Yeah. And then sure enough, I come back to that event and I see her walking down the hallway, and I'm like, yeah, nice. So good. So, but that's just, those are the things that I see. I love hearing. I think one of the things what I love hearing is when people use those certain phrases. Like a lot of organizations will say, they'll start talking about being on the X. And when they're talking about that, though, it makes me, in what they describe it is like, here, this is because when we're on the X in the military sense, right, those most extreme, the most deadly potential outcomes that we would have on that X, that is what we try to build our training to. So all training hopes to consider those most extreme situations. So when they start talking about the X, it means that they're gearing their preparation more deliberately, more thoughtfully to the most difficult situations they're going to face in their respective roles.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you. And what great to see that person back there, and to hear that feedback from them that you are having an impact. And it's such, it's funny. We just need, I don't know. We just need to remind people that, we all have the ability to do this. And I think it's from doubling down on our practices, understanding how mindfulness, meditation, breathing, understanding yourself on a deeper emotional level, could really change the game for anybody. And it kind of takes, as you mentioned it earlier, John, it takes us out of that victim, or just kind of reactive to the world. And we begin to put ourselves in the driver's seat, and we begin to take control of ourselves, whether it's mastering our emotions or mastering our schedule. And then making decisions from that place based on those values, which I think are obviously so important, which are going to lead us deeper into the purpose of what we're really here. And one thing, and I know the military does this. It's like, that the higher purpose is, helping other people, right? Servant leaders. And, if you're designing a business and being on purpose in that way, you're always going to find that juice. You're always going to be exercising those values. You're always going to find that inspiration. You're going to be also attracting the right people to you on a continual basis to help you on that mission, because you're so aligned in not just in a mind and a heartful way, and a mindful way too. So thank you, Stephen. This has been an awesome show with us today, and sharing all your wisdom and all the stuff you've translated from the military and into the civilian life and into the business life. What are some ways that people can find you? Whether social, website, and please, when is your book coming out, and how can we get a hold of it?
Yeah, forgive me on the front part. I forgot to update that to you. So I had to take it, I put the book through the Department of Defense Office of
Oh yeah.
Pre-Publication Review. And
Okay.
and I seem to have underestimated that. So I pushed the launch back because I
Okay,
was
great.
told it was going to be like 3-4 months. And then in
Yeah.
fact, it actually did come back in 1 month. So I could have made the October date, but we already pushed everything back to March. So my book will be
Okay.
coming out in March, Life on the
Okay.
X. In the meantime, if you want more information updates on that, please follow me on Stephen Drum on Instagram and on LinkedIn, but also my website, stephendrum.com, STEPHENDRUM.com.
Yeah, it's
Awesome.
all with a PH. Steve with a PH, everybody that's listening out there. All of it. No, because hey, I was confused. I was like making the wrong posters for you guys. So yeah, Steve
I
with a PH.
certainly don't help. I certainly don't help.
No, it's all good. It's all good. Hey, this is part of growing
We
a
should have
business.
just put with Master Chief Drummy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Just kept it simple. Hey, well, Drummy, it's been awesome having you here. Like Will said, and as we kind of covered before the episode, we wrap it up with the closing practice. And I'd love to have you guide that if you're still comfortable and up for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so let me set the stage here really quick. When we taught mindfulness, when we introduced mindfulness to the recruit division commanders and then to the same thing to the recruits, the thing that I learned, the thing that the psychologist taught was called recalibrate. That's the term we came up with. So essentially, if you think of it like this, sometimes you have a young recruit at the Navy's boot camp, 18 years old. They miss home. They're stressed. They haven't been sleeping. They're completely overwhelmed with the volume of information that they're receiving. And now we've got them doing some stressful training, like say firefighting training scenario. And they start to make mistakes. They start to compound. And then the instructor starts yelling at them. And before you know it, they're in that red zone, right? That fight, flight, or freeze. And they just are completely locked up and shut down. And so what we do now is we realize that this is an opportunity when they're feeling that the most stress they're probably going to feel in a training environment for them up to that point. It's an opportunity for us to pull them out of that fire and to say, okay, recalibrate, recruit. And they already been trained on this breathing exercise. And so they're able to lower some of that arousal, some of that energy, and they're able to go over their performance statement, which are their talking points, their objectives. And then we push them back in there. 9 times out of 10, they're going to be more successful, right?
Nice.
And so here's kind of what that looks like. It's diaphragmatic breathing. So not now, but when I say, here's what we're going to do, we're going to get comfortable. I offer up, close your eyes if you're good with that. If not, you can stare softly at the space in front of you. And we're going to inhale diaphragmatically, meaning we're inhale through our nose. We're going to inhale for 5 seconds, filling up our diaphragm and then our chest. Inhale for 5 seconds. We're going to hold and pause for 2. We're going to exhale through our mouth for 6 seconds, hold and pause for 2, and then we're going to repeat. So I'll count us through the first few breaths. And then after that, I just want everyone to do a few breaths on your own. But what I want you to do is at this point, instead of thinking about the count, I want you to think about and focus on the breathing itself, right? The rising and falling of your chest and your stomach, the feeling of your clothing on your skin. And when you exhale through your mouth, I want you to visualize your breath coming out with enough force to flicker the flame on a candle a few feet in front of you. When you get distracted, gently bring that thought back to the breathing itself. All right? Ready? Go ahead and close your eyes. Get ready. And inhale. 2, 3, 4, 5. Hold. 2. Exhale. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Hold. 2. Inhale. 2, 3, 4, 5. Hold. 2. Exhale on your own for a few breaths. When you get distracted, gently bring that focus back to your breathing. All right. Gently bring that focus. That was just a teaser, but hopefully you can have that tool for you folks out there, front of mind, practice it enough. Next time that jerk cuts you off in traffic, next time you're in a heated discussion with a spouse, with a loved one, your teammate, you're able to kind of break contact, recalibrate, lower that energy, and if appropriate, re-engage in a more mindful and thoughtful manner.
I love it. Love it, man. Well done. Thank you for that. Definitely appreciate that exercise. And then obviously, as I mentioned before, appreciate having you here on the show. Fantastic episode. Hang tight after we do the closing music and everything. We just want to chat with you for a second. As far as our audience, thank you for joining us here today. We sincerely appreciate you tuning in. If you got something out of this episode, please share it with your friends, family, colleagues, whoever you feel could benefit. And as Will said at the very beginning, please give us a review and subscribe to the podcast to get access to that exclusive content. And the link will be in the show notes. And follow us on YouTube too. So thank you so much. And until next time, peace.
Peace. Thank you. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Joining us today. We hope you walk away with some new tools and insights to guide you on your life journey. New episodes are being published every week, so please join us again for some meaningful discussion. For more information, please check out mentalkingmindfulness.com.